Among one of the many things that I am is a futurist. Now, I've always been a futurist, actually. I've considered myself a futurist ever since I was a young child living in Toronto in my Greek parents' home, reading science fiction novels underneath the covers at night. So I would sneak a flashlight in. It was late. It was dark. Everybody else was asleep. I had a stack of science fiction novels beside the bed, like I have today. That hasn't changed. But every night, as everyone else went to sleep, I would pull out one of these science fiction novels. And I would read like 4 or 5 novels at the same time. I have bookmarks. I would pull out a novel and I would get under my covers and I would turn the flashlight on and I would sit there and I would lie there and read about the far, far future. My favorite novels were the ones that were set in the far, far future. And even today, my favorite novels are the ones that are set in a far, far future. And in a future where we've solved all the problems of today. And of course, there's more problems tomorrow. But we've solved a lot of the problems of today. So it was good to live in that future where many of the problems of today have been solved. So I've always loved science fiction, and I've always loved envisioning that future. So when I found out that there was actually a career choice of being a futurist, I thought, well, I got to do that. That's absolutely something that I'm 100% interested in because I love the future. I think about the future all the time. In fact, that's one of the reasons why this show is named Think Future, and my handle is Think Future on a lot of social media, because that is what I do. It's almost like I want to live in the future as opposed to living in today. So why am I saying this? Well, over the last couple of weeks, we've had a controversy around the use of the voice that ChatGPT 4.0 is using in their audio. And what they've done is that they've picked a voice, or at least the voice that was in the demo, that was very, very similar to Scarlett Johansson's voice. And I think that one of the reasons why they picked, first of all, I believe that they actually approached her to see if she could do the voice, and I think it didn't work out. So what they did is they found an actress who was similar, her voice was similar to Scarlett Johansson's, and used her voice to create the voice of, I think the character's name is Sky in ChatGPT 4.0. Now, what ended up happening was that at first they were using the voice and nobody said anything. And then somebody asked Sam Altman what the inspiration was for using that kind of voice for 4.0, ChatGPT 4.0. And he responded with one single word: her. Now, if you're a science fiction geek like I am, you probably know about the movie Her. Now, I'm not exactly sure when it came out, sometime in the 2000s. But basically, the concept behind the movie was that it was set in the future, and it was set in the future when we all had audio assistants. We didn't have visual assistants. We didn't have assistants that sat in front of us like augmented reality. We had audio assistants. So kind of like right now where you have your iPod sitting in your ear, it would be able to hear where you were, and it would be able to whisper things into your ear to tell you things, right? So unlike today where we have to pull out our phones and look at a visual interface of what we're trying to do, we would be able to look at, or we listen to, an audio interface of what we wanted to do. So this audio interface was, at the beginning of the movie, wasn't very sophisticated, but during the course of the movie, he decides to download a new operating system, a brand new AI, which was a lot more sophisticated. And this more sophisticated AI, he proceeds to fall in love with. And I won't tell you the end of the story because you can go out and watch the movie yourself. And one of the things I thought was really interesting about this film is that, if you ask me, I think it's probably one of the most accurate representations of where the future is going to be. Now, you see representations like Ready Player One, where people are always wearing these augmented reality goggles, and they live in this augmented reality world. And in Her, people don't live in an augmented reality world. They all have their headphones, their AirPods, and they're talking to their virtual assistants through their AirPods. And that is the interface to the virtual assistant. Like I said, it's not a visual assistant. It's not a visual thing. It is an audio thing. And I always thought that that was a much more powerful interface for a couple of reasons. So first of all, when you have a visual interface, the visual interface actually gets in the way of your interconnection with other people, right? So let's say I'm sitting here wearing an Apple Vision Pro, one of those giant Apple Vision Pros, and I'm trying to talk to you. Now, I see somebody wearing a giant headset on their face and a blankness over the eyes. Whereas if I'm wearing the Apple Vision Pro, it's actually opened up a little portal where I can see you and I can talk to you. But the technology is literally in the way. It's between us. It's in between the communication. It interrupts, visually and physically interrupts the communication, the visual communication between you and me. And that's where I think a lot of these visual interfaces tend to fail, right? Whether it's AR, VR, MR, when you put this giant contraption on your head, it's a bit difficult to interface with another human. I mean, can you see somebody wearing an Apple Vision Pro and walking down the street and interfacing with people? It's just not going to happen, right? I mean, maybe at some point when the AR, VR goggles get to the point where they actually look just like a pair of eyeglasses or like a pair of sunglasses, then I can absolutely see that happen. Absolutely. But until then, I think we should move forward or really push the ball forward on an audio interface, because everybody's got AirPods, everybody's got earphones, everybody walks around all the time with an audio interface. Now, if our audio interfaces were more intelligent, then that would be great. Wouldn't it be great if our audio interfaces could listen to everything that was around us? So first of all, they're connected to our phones. So the phones know where we are. They kind of know what we're doing because they can look at our calendars. They can look at everything around us. So they can assume things about us. And then they can, as I've said previously, if the technology allows it, proactively help us through our day. That's when they become a real virtual assistant. But I didn't want to talk about that specifically because I talked about it in the Proactive AI episode a few days back. What I wanted to talk about was the power of an idea, the power of science fiction. Now, in my futurist practice, I use this all the time. What I do is I go into the far, far future and I look at science fiction, hard science fiction, not fantasy, hard science fiction from the far, far future. So these authors have envisioned a future. And in the envisioning of the future, they have created the idea of that future. And the moment you create the idea of that future, then at some point, someone can take that idea and turn it into something once the technology happens. So basically in the practice, what we do is we go out 10 years, which I've done on my show many times, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. We imagine the far, far future. And then once we imagine the far, far future, we imagine the far, far future as much as we possibly can. But let's say a lot of times people can't imagine the future that far out. So let's just go 10 years. So we imagine where we're going to be in the year 2034, 10 years from now. And once we try to imagine what life will be like in 2034, the world will be like, what our customers will be like, what people will be like, then we simply work backwards. I mean, if you've ever done these paper mazes, I don't know if you do Sudoku or any of these paper mazes. I remember when I was a kid, when I went on long road trips, we used to get these books of mazes, or my parents would get me these books of mazes, and we'd be sitting in the back and trying to sort of pencil through these books of mazes. And going from the start to the end is very difficult because it's a maze, right? It's designed for it to be difficult going from the start to the end. But you know what's not difficult? Going from the end to the start. Taking the maze backwards is always easier because you know where you're going. So it's easier to know how to get there. So the practice is called backcasting. And basically what it is the opposite of forecasting. But you have a fixed vision of where you want to be. And once you have this fixed vision of where you want to be, then you can work backwards to today. Now, I want to say that a lot of the patents that I have, and I have about 390 or so patents out there, are envisions just like that. Basically what I did was I took a far future science fiction novel that I like to read, from one of the many authors that I like to read, and I took the idea and I said to myself, if we assume that that future is going to exist, then what would we need to do today? What kind of thing needs to be invented today for us to eventually get to that future? So I took that idea and I backcasted it to today. Like, what is the great granddaddy of this thing that this author has invented? And that's how you get to something brand new. As instead of taking, because a lot of people do it this way, they basically look at what's there today, and they trend it out. They say, okay, I can see what you have now, and I can see where it's going, or I can envision where it's going, which is great, but that keeps you from doing anything really new and different and innovative because it still connects you to the past. Whereas if you start in a crazy far future time that you've envisioned and then you work backwards to today, that's when you can create the really cool and interesting stuff. But the main point I wanted to make today was about the idea. So Sam Altman, OpenAI, got the idea of building an AI voice interface like they did from the movie Her. So the movie Her, if you think about it, the movie Her took an idea and lodged it into the consciousness of humanity. It was a film, popular media, envisioned a future, and then envisioned that future and lodged it into the psyche of humanity. And the moment that idea is lodged into the psyche of humanity, and it can be lodged into the psyche of humanity in many different ways, right? You can lodge ideas into the psyche of humanity just by posting them on X, by putting them on Facebook, by posting them on LinkedIn, by doing a TikTok, by doing a patent, by making a movie. All of these futuristic ideas can be lodged into the human consciousness in this way. They basically come out of your head and they go into some public forum, some public place. You invented this idea, and whether or not you want to protect it and store it like you would in a patent, or you just want to free it out to the world, you've lodged it into the human consciousness. And the moment you lodge it into the human consciousness, you allow it to be free so that somebody else at some point, maybe not today, but at some point in the future, can look at that idea and go, you know what? That's a great idea. That's a really interesting idea. I want to build that idea. I want to build it, and now we have the technology to build the idea. So if you think about it, when Spike Jonze did Her, the movie Her, we didn't have the technology to build that type of virtual assistant, that type of audio virtual assistant. But today we do. And that's one of the reasons why Sam Altman pushed back and said Her as the concept behind ChatGPT 4.0. And interestingly enough, who do you think voiced the her, the audio assistant, the AI in her, was voiced by Scarlett Johansson. So maybe they took that a bit literally. Maybe whoever was building this tool said, you know what, we're going to use that as a model. We're going to use the movie Her as a model. And wouldn't it be great if the voice was just like Scarlett Johansson's? So this is what I'm saying, is that a lot of the things that are being built today, and don't even get me started about Star Trek. You know I'm a huge Star Trek fan. But a lot of the stuff that we're using today what originated in Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, in the original series. Cell phones, 3D printers, all that stuff was envisioned back then and was lodged into the human consciousness through that television show. And whenever science fiction lodges these things in our consciousness, then maybe at some point in the future, those things will actually turn into something. Or maybe you or your children or your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren will turn them into something. And that's why I think it's incredibly important for us, no matter who we are, if we have ideas, is to get those ideas out there into some public forum and lodge them into human consciousness. Don't save them in your brain or in a paper notebook. Get them out there in the world so that you or someone else, your progeny, or even people generations from now can see that and go, yeah, that's an interesting idea. I think we have the technology to build this today. And what were these people doing? They were envisioning the future. This is why it's so important to envision the future. And the word is Provlepsi. Provlepsi is forethought in Greek. It's thinking about where we're going. But not just thinking about where we're going, thinking about where we're going and then putting it out there into the world, into the universe, so that you and or others can at some point actually build this amazing thing that you've envisioned. That's why I think thinking about the future is so important. That's why I think science fiction is so important. And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really matter what form it takes, as long as the idea is put into a public place where it can fly and be free. And someone else, at some point in the future, can take this idea and run with it and maybe eventually create it. It's inspiration for people. Because whenever you think about the future and you envision the future and you come up with ideas of how the future would be and how it's created, and you lodge them out there in the human consciousness, then at some point they may become true. They could turn out to be real. You may or may not be around to see it, but don't you think it's cool that the ideas that you envision today and put out there may actually become something? Remember, the future is bright if we do it right. That's it for me for today. See you next time, and until then, don't forget to think future.